Hello, welcome to this live broadcast on data, art and privacy. My name is Claire Catterall and I'm Director of Exhibitions at Somerset House. Today I'm talking to artists Owen Mundy in New York and Blas in Germany. Thank you both for joining us.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
So this talk will run for approximately half an hour-ish, and after I've introduced the background to the show and Owen and Zach's work, we'll talk broadly about the issues that arise from their practices and what lessons can be learned. If any of you are watching us live and you have any queries, then please tweet to us at Somerset House with the hashtag #BigBangData, with any comments or questions you'd like Owen or Zach to answer about their work or the Big Bang Data exhibition generally. For those of you who haven't been to the show, the exhibition looks at the big data explosion and explores how data is affecting every one of us and how it will shape our world in the future. I'll introduce Zach. Zach Blas is an artist, writer and academic, currently teaching at Goldsmiths in London and previously assistant professor at the Department of Art at the University at Buffalo. His work centres around media theory, science and technology studies, queer and feminist theory, contemporary art and activism, and political philosophy. His work, the work that we've got in the exhibition is called Face Cages. These are masks or cages designed in a way to mimic the way that facial recognition technology scans human faces. Their weird, sinister appearance makes comment on the insidious growth of visual surveillance in our society. The masks are intentionally painful to wear to illustrate the discomfort in imposing quantified, presumptuous data onto the face of individuals. Owen is an artist, designer and programmer who investigates public space and its relationship to data. His artworks highlight inconspicuous trends and offers tools to make hackers out of everyone. Assistant Professor of Art at Florida State University, he was in a former life a photographer in the US Navy. And the experience of militarism has been an important influence on his work. Most of his work is around data and aims to suggest that it is tangible, and he challenges users to think about ways in which their information is used for purposes outside of their control by government or corporate entities. So Zach, obviously, I mean, your work is not just a comment on surveillance, but it's about how this kind of data is used to standardize or categorize people. Can you explain a bit more about the dangers surrounding this?
Yeah, of course. I mean, maybe it makes sense for me to just do that through a brief overview of the project. And what I would say is Face Cages for me was really designed or inspired by critical dystopic science fiction. So for me, Face Cages is very much a critical dystopic project, and the title comes from the feminist communication scholar Shoshana Magnet, and in a recent book she wrote called When Biometrics Fail, she described biometrics as a cage of information. And I found this description of biometrics as a cage of information incredibly provocative because on the one hand it emphasizes biometrics as a technology of criminalization, right? It's a technology designed to police people, but also that it's a static, frozen, abstracted or standardized reading, you know, of a face or fingers or eyes. So I was really interested in that part about biometrics, how biometrics have to develop modes to technically standardize identification, right? Like you develop a standard to analyze a face globally, and then, you know, actually how in practice that most negatively impacts a broad set of minoritarian persons, whether that's transgender people at airports or when biometrics miscalculate dark skin. So in the installation, I've specifically worked with certain queer and feminist or transgender artists that represent these types of like highly targeted individuals, and we've all scanned our faces and produced, you know, a biometric reading of our face, and that was turned into a metal object to kind of emphasize certain processes of criminalization, like prison bars and handcuffs. And then these metal face cages, which are biometric readings of our face, which you think would fit perfectly, right? When we put them on, they actually don't fit very well, and they're quite painful and difficult at times to wear. And the reason, for doing this is to actually dramatize the political problem between the way biometrics abstracts the body and the body itself, in a materialized way. So each of the artists in the Face Cages project wear these face cages in endurance performances for the camera, where the prompt is wear it until you can't bear it any longer, right? And the point of that is to kind of dramatize this political struggle of biometric abstraction, in real time and duration.
Okay, thank you. Owen, your project in the exhibition is called I Know Where Your Cat Lives. And this is an online project that takes images people have taken of their cats via Instagram and visualizes them on a world map using coordinates embedded in their metadata, showing exactly where they are. The implication is that we know, or they know, where you live too. And the piece is meant as a wake-up call. So I wonder if you can explain a little of your thinking behind the piece. How did you come to the idea? How did you go about developing it? And what did you hope it would achieve?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. The best way is to describe this kind of quaint little narrative, if you can imagine me in my backyard playing with at the time she was 3, my 3-year-old daughter, and I was photographing her and sharing the images, and quite aware that when you upload photographs to Instagram, they're public. And one day I looked down and I saw that there was a map button, and so I clicked it, and I realized that the whole time that I'd been using the app, the software and the phone had been collecting the geographic coordinates of the photographs, embedding them in the metadata of the image, and uploading them. And so, my first thought was that this is a creepy experience, and I didn't, I didn't care to feel. I didn't like to know that someone was collecting my data without knowing and sharing that information publicly. But once I started to do a little research and I looked at the Instagram API, the application program interface, which is I think a really short way to describe an API is that it's kind of like Google. You perform a query or a search, and it returns some kind of results. An API is specifically for machines to access. It's returned in a machine language, specifically JSON, and which is like XML or any other kind of data transfer language, and it's meant to return those requests thousands of times per second. In fact, anyone can get an API key from Instagram and make 5,000 queries per hour, and get about 30 results each time. So anybody can do that. And that's when I realized that the problem wasn't just my own, that the problem likely affected all the millions and millions of users of Instagram. And so I wanted to communicate the experience. I wanted to problematize the benefits and the joy of sharing and using the technology, and then make people consider the problems, the double-edged sword of using digital media. And so I mapped the cats. I collected at first I collected 1 million cats, and then I mapped them. And I could probably talk a lot more about the development, but I'll say that I intentionally made the website fun to use. At every point when I was designing it, it was a process of trying to make the experience more and more about something that would be enjoyable and actually compete with television. I was specifically trying to balance the politics of the work with the fun, and because I chose cats so specifically for a variety of reasons. Obviously, they're important to the internet, but also when people look at cats on the internet, in a way, they're the cats are kind of aloof and they pretend they don't see the camera or they really don't care, and but yet they're being watched. And in a way, we're kind of like the cats when we're using the internet, because for every time we access a piece of software or a website or or use a digital device in any way, that information is being recorded and used to persuade us. And so, in a way, the cats are the most perfect animal to use for this experiment.
Well, absolutely. And I think, both your works are incredibly articulate, actually, at explaining some of the problems. And the cat one especially, people love the cats in our exhibition. It's one of the most popular exhibits. Sometimes it's quite hard to get them past the cats. It's like, hey, there's a work about cats. And you think, well, yeah, it's about cats, but actually it's something about so much more than just, cute little furry things on the internet. And you both come at the subject from slightly different angles. But at the heart of both your projects is this idea that data is being collected, stored and analysed about all of us. And it's taken without our consent or knowledge, and it's shared on global networks between police and governments and security agencies and consumer companies, the military. What exactly are the implications of this? Zach, what's your view?
Well, that's a really vast question. Maybe for me, just to bring it back a little bit more specifically within the work that I have there, what I'm really interested in with working with the face is I'm really struck by how the face actually has this incredibly rich history in art or philosophy and throughout the 20th century as a prize site of where ethics gets articulated, where you experience alterity. And what is really striking with me with biometric facial recognition and even things like Facebook, a particular idea or understanding of what a face is today is beginning to permeate. And it's a definition or an understanding of a face that really doesn't have hardly anything in common with these older 20th century articulations of a face as a site of ethics. Now we're getting a proliferation of the face as a surface code, the face as a mode of governance, the face as a surface of which to control and modulate populations. So, and again, that is all really broken down to by issues of capture. And this, for me, with my work, is a much interesting framework than surveillance. I'm really interested in capture because capture emphasizes how algorithms have to be standardized to measure and identify human subjects. And when you kind of look into this research with biometrics, you begin to realize that when scientists or technologists, whoever in the corporate sector are developing these biometric algorithms, right, they end up pulling from certain populations. That might be an over-reliance on Caucasian subjects or heterosexual subjects or cisgender subjects. And then, what happens is when you standardize algorithms that identify people from that pool of people is that then, right, people who are on the fringes of that actually experience, legitimate forms of political violence. Whereas, I think I've already suggested this once, but a really easy example here is when in the past, transgender people go to an airport, their body gets biometrically scanned, and when that biometric scan does not align with the identification card they present, with the gender that's listed there, in the past those people have been automatically subjected to terrorist protocol. So, for me with biometrics, what's happening is you're getting a regime of identification that is so serious and crucial to think about because it's actually how governments all over the world are beginning to manage, right, and modulate and control populations. And again, there's a very particular type of person that ends up experiencing kind of the most harsh, intensified political fallout from that. And even myself, when I just moved to the United Kingdom, before I was even allowed to enter the country, I had to get I had to enter into the UK's new visa program, which is actually called a biometric residence permit. And before I moved to the United Kingdom, I had to go to a building in Manhattan that shares office space with the Department of Homeland Security and basically let someone scan my whole body pretty much. And my partner did this as well. And the first time we left England on a trip and came back, my partner's biometric data did not authenticate. Like something was wrong. You know, his fingerprint wasn't found. And what happened in that moment was that he was kind of treated as a worst case scenario and was immediately subjected to a fraud expert analyst and was basically accused of having facial surgery and not reporting it. So you just kind of see like actually the intensification of which this kind of regime of identification is becoming more and more relied upon, and it's a regime that really affects most acutely certain forms of minoritarian persons.
That's quite an incredible story. Owen, do you have similar experiences? What do you think your work exposes?
Well, I'm still kind of reeling from Zach's story. That's amazing to be put into that situation where your life experience mirrors the work so directly, and quite scary actually. To be making that work, and you know, I always think about artists like Laura Poitras who have been so immersed within a life that I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like to be stuck in this, you know, in this non-space of the airport, and where someone is telling me that my body doesn't match the body they have on record for me. That's a scary future.
Right, and I mean, I want to add to that of course, you know, what's important about my example is that, you know, I'm, you know, basically probably one of the most privileged subjects to come through that border at the UK, right? I'm a professor, I'm an American, you know, there are all these kind of clear indicators that I think would already, you know, tip me into a favorable categorization to begin with. So it's just striking that even, you know, with that, we still encountered this, you know, just kind of your biometric data doesn't match for whatever reason, and like, you know, we're going to detain you until that is figured out. So you can imagine what other types of people experience, you know, from different nations with different backgrounds that are not in the privileged position that I'm in crossing the UK border. Yeah.
One of the issues that I try to bring up in this and other works is some of the problems with big data in general. You know, with everything being collected, they have to invent new ways to analyze it, right? And so you have you know, various types of algorithms and different types of new ways to drill down on the information, you know, for discovery. And one of the issues that's been pointed out is that once you have such an enormous database, and then it actually causes researchers and governments and corporations to start to generalize, and instead of acknowledging that the you know, humankind is so diverse, and that there are lots of people who don't fit neatly into categories, they instead do the opposite and try to create only large groups of categories in order to properly identify people, so they can you know, basically reduce everyone to a kind of a binary. Are they a customer, or are they not yet a customer? Are they a terrorist, or are they not yet a terrorist? You know, and so that's one of the things. I mean, so with capture, it's the first step, you know, into this world where everything is reduced, and if you don't fit into the standard prototype, then you get thrown into the, you know, the edges where you're not properly identified.
One of the most frightening things really about data, and certainly what we talk about in the exhibition, is the capacity to get things really horribly wrong. And one of the interesting things, Zach, I think that you talk about is this idea of people's right to opacity, which I find really interesting, which is a concept that comes from the philosopher Edouard Glissant. And I think that's one of the things that data doesn't help us to achieve, is this idea that, or help us to protect rather, is this people's idea about opacity and people's right not to be fully understood or to be fully transparent.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So I have a companion project that goes with face cages, and it's a work that's more widely circulated, which is called the Facial Weaponization Suite, where I developed a series of masks that, on the one hand, are about evading facial detection, but they're also about this kind of demand for opacity. And I'm writing a book about this right now. It's called Informatic Opacity. So I'm kind of updating this idea from Glissant to try and think about the digital world and informatics and capture. And Glissant, even though he didn't really talk much about technology, and when he did, he really hated it and was quite negative, but he was a Caribbean philosopher and poet and passed away recently. But his idea of opacity was, just like what you said. It's about trying to make a demand that there's, an aspect of another person that you can't fully understand or know, right? And he even says this is different than the idea of difference, because even following like the logic of difference, you can only know what you're different by what you're not. So like difference has still this idea of like identification to it. But opacity is absolutely not about identification at all. And Glissant has this incredibly beautiful ethical claim in his writing where he says we must fight or clamor for the right to opacity for everyone. And what he meant by that was, he's writing from the Caribbean. He's talking about the West and the Enlightenment project coming in and colonial conquest. And he had this incredible, breathtaking critique of transparency with his idea of opacity. But for him, transparency means forms of universalism. To assume that another person can be put before you and made magically transparent, right? Fully knowable. And so if you think about that, Glissant's idea of transparency, biometrics would fit that, right? The kind of dream drive of biometrics is, one template to make all faces globally transparent, one template to make, a hand geometry successfully read. So I think Glissant is an incredibly provocative place to begin to articulate some kind of politics or ethics that pushes against these ideas of total capture, which is very much so where we're moving. But at the same time, it's important not to just easily fetishize these technologies and understand that they break a lot, they don't work perfectly, the future isn't written in stone. And I just think Glissant is that idea of opacity is an incredibly provocative and I think useful idea to mobilize around. And also for me, it gives us a different kind of politics than the one we commonly gravitate to, which is privacy. I don't think opacity and privacy are the same thing. I think opacity is a different kind of politics. Maybe it falls at the more utopic or radical or philosophical end of the spectrum, where the kind of thrust of privacy with anti-surveillance is typically, at the level of policy change or the state level. Not to, dismiss work organizing around privacy, but I do think opacity gives us a different way forward.
Yes. Thank you for that. There are a lot of works in the exhibition. Particularly, I'm thinking of another artist in the exhibition, Nicholas Felton, who produces an artwork based on 10 years of annual reports, where he's gathered 10 years of information about his life, his habits, his personality, relationships. And he's translated these into maps and graphs and statistics. And he describes the experience in really positive terms and seems to view the big data explosion as having the potential to have hugely beneficial effects. We've talked about the dark side, but do you see any positive effects at all? And, the fact is data is here to stay. So what do you think needs to happen now to make sure that it's developed in a more altruistic manner? Owen.
Yeah, I think. Sorry.
Sorry, that was a kind of quite a big question to ask.
Uh,
It seems so dark. I mean, is there a chink of light in there, do you think?
yeah. Well, I love looking at Felton's work. I've been following it for a while. I think they're really beautiful. I can empathize. As a photographer, I fetishize the image. And now as I've shifted to representing the world through data instead of through film, I find a certain fascination with this, with the index of the world that's so dripping with fact, but also has all these problems. So I think that the problem for one of the problems for me in the work that I've been doing is that the web economy is built up around surveillance. Everything, are you still there, Claire?
Yes.
Okay, your picture was gone. So when the web was introduced to us, it was this utopian public space where we could go and talk about our cats and science fiction, and researchers could share data across universities and also withstand a nuclear attack. But it had that issue, but as it's grown up, it's really become this enormous surveillance machine, and everything that we do is being collected. And but there are little bits, as you ask, in that we can find the nearest taco shop and get the directions. And but you have to give up a little bit of data about yourself, and so Mark Zuckerberg said that privacy is changing, or he said it's dead, but I would say it's changing, and you can't really. It's a hard thing to legislate against because everyone feels so differently, and that's why there are no really good laws in the United States. Europe is introducing laws. But I think that if somehow the state could keep the corporations from taking too much, from using too much, and that people would kind of go along with that, then we would probably, the world would start to be a little bit better in terms of the way that our data is being used. But like you said, it's here to stay. So we have to speak our minds and put our arguments in public places so that we can have this debate, and so that the people who are funding the corporations and building the startups listen to us and don't don't abuse us.
I think obviously one of the most powerful ways of doing that is through art, and I think both your projects do it really eloquently.
Thanks.
Zach, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I know my work, especially the Face Cages project, it's quite it's quite a negative take on all of this, but I will say that's also for me why there's a companion work to it. This other project, this Mask project, which really is for me a utopian project, and it's a positive project, and it's about social movements and collectivity and fighting for autonomy or opacity. So I really do believe in the power of socially struggling for a different kind of politics, a different kind of world. I mean, I definitely have no trust or faith in the government with these things. So I don't really think things are going to get better on that front. And I mean, maybe that seems really immobilizing, but to me it just means that a broader political shift needs to happen. Maybe something like a revolution. Wouldn't that be fantastic?
Yeah. Sure.
I have a question or just a comment for Owen, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Owen, I just wanted to say that I really like you using the figure of the cat. I just think that's really, it's like so spot on. The cat as a like a, kind of this like reflexive thing that we can use to actually think about our own condition in the internet. And then to me, like a kind of fun conceptual or artistic question then is like, how do we stop being cats?
That's a great question. Thank you. That's very sweet. That's very nice of you to say.
Yeah, it's like, what do we need to transform into?
Yeah. Well, this sounds very arrogant, but I think that the more people that stand up and question where their media comes from and questions because the internet now is replacing journalism, right? And so like our information, everything that we consider fact is going to be we're going to be living in these little filter bubbles where some corporation is deciding the content that we see based on the last thing we clicked or liked, based on some metric. And so the longer that we accept that and just kind of giggle through life, then the longer we are going to be cats. And there's nothing wrong with being a cat, unless you're allergic. But like my family, oh yeah, my wife she like closes up. She has to have an inhaler. It's kind of an ironic part. And so is my daughter, who holds them up to her face. And but I think it's okay to be a cat, but I think we should also question what what we're allowing to happen around us, and make sure and voice our, as you say, our struggles in creative and in creative ways that interrupts the standard the standard way people are living and consuming.
Yeah.
I think your work does that too, Zach. Because just to return, the facial weaponization suite especially is just so visually so striking. I think one of the critiques that can be offered, and I don't think you can offer it very well across the work that's been included in the Big Bang Data Show, but this critique is that art, regardless of the amount of politics and thought that you put into it, if you hide it away in a gallery, it has a very limited chance of actually communicating those ideas to someone who doesn't already believe them or think them. And so, and I think what your work does is that it somehow magically combines something beautiful and abstract into a method that I think average people who aren't educated in art history can understand and can learn from as well as enjoy. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think that's one thing that's really successful about your work and a lot of the works in this show.
I think that's a good point. I would just say I think having a public practice is really crucial for a lot of this kind of work, which is why it doesn't translate in the installation, but all of those, and it's not even at Somerset House, but those masks were developed through month-long workshops. So actually a huge part of that project was spending time with a group of people, a lot of time. So it kind of begins from this more workshop-y, pedagogical, collective space. But I kind of that's what I really like actually about the mask. It's able to move between a practical tool and a conceptual object. And when it moves into the space of the gallery, it takes on something more speculative, maybe more sci-fi.
Yeah.
Do you actually expect people to wear the masks out in public? Is that part of the reason? Is that part of why you created them?
Well, I mean, yes and no. What I would say about that is I also think, if artists dealing with surveillance, need to have some kind of public engagement, I also think they need to be humble about what they're actually achieving. And I think there's been a lot of other proliferation of artists making masks to evade technology, but it's always kind of, a lot of this newer work is framed around like, oh, it's just the best technological fix. And, these new projects come out and they critique everyone that came before them, and then they say, oh, I've got the better fix. But of course, I think that misses a big chunk of what this work is actually achieving, because you're not going to be able to wear that mask at an airport. Mm. So for me, the work serves as a pedagogical tool. It also serves as something conceptual in the sense that it's able to present to people a political demand that they can, possibly engage with. But it also shows them that there are ways to kind of fracture or work against these technologies, even if they're kind of small. I still think so many people get paralyzed by even having this conversation because they just think there's nothing that can be done. Mm. And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say that I think, people have a problem with the subject anyway. That's certainly something that we've experienced with doing the exhibition. People don't really understand what it's about at all. So they don't, until they come to see it, they don't really know what they're coming to see. But also, obviously people don't really understand what data is about, which is exactly what the exhibition is trying to explain to them. But the whole idea of the internet is something that's quite opaque to a lot of people. And I know that, Zach, you've argued that we should abandon the internet altogether. So I kind of wondered what you meant by that.
Yeah, so that's not exactly what I mean, but what I will say is I'm doing a new project right now that just got funded by Creative Capital, and it's called Contra Internet. And this idea for me is, again, because all of my work gets developed out of feminist and queer frameworks and ideas. It comes out of the writings of the transgender writer and curator Paul Preciado and his contrasexual manifesto. So this for me is kind of a mashup of the contrasexual and today's obsession with post-internet, in the sense that I think, for me, what's really interesting from a queer perspective is that I think people have a really difficult time imagining like what an alternative to the internet could be, in the sense that the internet has become this like deeply homogenized place where we identify so intimately with corporate social media infrastructure. We willfully or unknowingly, or we don't care, that we're just kind of letting corporations and governments and whatever aggregate our data and surveil us. And I think for me, from a queer perspective, queer life has always had such a rich history of subcultural spaces, and you would typically think about that as bars or maybe like art spaces. But why doesn't that really translate online? And to me, I think we're living in a moment where it's incredibly, and I mean this, I mean it technically, but I also mean it imaginatively, and like where our political horizon is oriented. Like, why can't we think beyond the malaise of the internet today, where it's cats and lulz and that kind of thing? So for me, the Contra Internet actually is about trying to articulate alternatives to the internet condition that we're currently living in, which seems impossible to think beyond. Because you can just propose to people that you're against the internet and they think you're crazy, or they think you're a neo-Luddite. They can't even understand that disarticulation of like, communicating through digital networks doesn't have to be like what we're living in today. So this project is actually, on the one hand, about documenting like real network alternatives that activists are developing around the world, because those activist projects actually, they do shift the political horizon to us, and they show us that there's another future, another possibility beyond like the internet as we know it today. So for me, that's what that project is very much about. It's about taking a kind of like imaginary and political alternative view of the internet, but not being anti-technological.
Yeah, no, that sounds incredibly interesting. I'd love to see that. Owen, what do you think?
Yeah, I can't help but think of Miranda July's Somebody app. Do you know this, Zach? It's do you know this? Mm-hmm. The app? Yeah. I think that it was it's the first time in a while that I've seen something that was contra internet, not for the sake of being contra internet.
Can you explain it to us, Owen, what it was?
Yes, thank you. I should. Yes, thanks. Let's see. So it's a mobile app. You download it, and with the app, you can send a message to somebody that you really like, or any kind of message, and then that off it goes. It leaves your phone, and then somebody nearby the person who you want to receive the message will receive the message, and then go relay it to the intended receiver in person.
Right.
So it's a hard thing to explain in 20 seconds. There's a great video on her website of how it works. But it's, so what it does is that it takes the conversation offline for a moment. It's like playing telephone, except there's a moment where you're not dependent on the internet, whether you don't want to be surveilled or because you don't want to be bound by the interfaces that they give you. But it also introduces some really nice awkward moments where strangers are meeting strangers and performing favors, which sounds strange, but so I couldn't help think of that, and I also couldn't think. I love the idea for your project. I didn't read it. Congrats on the grant too. That's wonderful, Zach. But I think that I couldn't also help but think of the the history of activism before the internet, before Twitter, and like in the United States during the leading up to the Civil War, when slaves were trying to escape through the Underground Railroad, there were a series of very interesting communication networks that happened. There's one man who he nailed himself into a box and shipped himself to perform on stage, and they would literally open him up on stage, and it all came from a moment where he escaped through that same method, and then he performed it later on, and then various other types of turning on lights and off lights across the river, when the safe house was safe or not, and it opens up a lot of really interesting bits of history, I think. So it's very nice.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of communicating is really important. And the idea that nowadays, you can't really communicate unless you do it, digitally, either online or Facebook or whatever. But also, I'm really intrigued by this idea of, introducing a bit of human awkwardness back into the process and a bit of ambiguity. And I think, we're in danger of losing that, as you both say. And I wonder if there are other ways that we can somehow introduce this idea of kind of human failure, in a way, kind of human ambiguity back into the equation. What do you think, Zach?
Well, I think that's tough. I mean, I think that as artists, we can try and, in the past, I've made more humorous work about this. For instance, I made this early project where I was investigating, like, why is it that electrical plugs are gendered male and female based on pinhole configuration? Why do we have to understand the way electricity works through a metaphor of heterosexual intercourse? And so, I did like this kind of humorous, like making like different types of plugs beyond male and female. But I mean, with this, I think a lot of people, I'll give examples of like a black person not getting recognized by facial detection, or you see an Asian woman's face and the camera is asking, did she blink when she didn't? And, typically people laugh at those examples when I make that presentation in public. And, it is funny, but I think like right now I'm just not in a funny mood. Like, I think it's the only way I know how to deal with this right now is like I'm actually getting more and more serious with my work, because I just feel like the consequences and the political stakes are so high. Like I've just noticed this personally, like in the shift in my own work. But I do feel like I'm really concerned and committed to the ideas of ambiguity that you're talking about. And it's kind of like the machines fail themselves. It's kind of like as artists, all we need to do is just reveal that. We don't need to make them fail. They're already failing, right? And so I guess to me that kind of creates a polarity of ambiguity. Like, these machines fail because they can't read people, and then that causes like serious political consequences. That's one kind of ambiguity. But then there's the other kind of ambiguity, maybe the opacity, still trying to struggle for that. And both of those are entwined and entangled, and they're completely mixed up with each other. So I don't know. I think, my kind of work is just trying to make sense of the mess of that, and how do we move forward.
It does seem that, sometimes data can get it so wrong. And I wonder if there will be some sort of reaction against it, and hopefully, through the work of artists such as yourselves, there may be a bit more humanity put back into it.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully.
Right, okay, thanks for that, guys. It's been really interesting talking to you. Really fascinating, so thanks for that.
Thank you, Claire.
Of course,
Nice
pleasure.
Zach.
Yeah, it was great to meet you, Owen. Nice to talk, Claire.
So just to let anyone know that the exhibition's now been extended by popular demand until the 20th of March, so please do come and visit if you haven't already been. All the information on visiting the exhibition is up on our Big Bang Data website, as well as details of our late openings and our upcoming events and talks programme, including next Saturday at 3:30 p.m. When we will be talking to Brendan Dawes. So we hope you enjoyed this online chat. The event will be available to watch back via Somerset House's website, as well as our YouTube channel shortly. Thanks very much, Owen. Thanks, Zach. And hopefully speak soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.